Tonight on CBC Vancouver News.
We've heard concerns about these medications being diverted and ending up in the wrong hands.
Major change. BC will no longer let people take home prescription opioids to try to stop them from ending up in the hands of criminals. Critics say the move is way overdue.
Real bad actors are those that ignored years of evidence.
Plus,
a lot of us aren't sleeping super well at night.
the specter of a trade war with the U.S. throws more uncertainty into BC's housing market. Developers are nervous as thousands of projects are being built.
They feel paralyzed to make a decision.
And
a huge part of relief.
A BC athlete makes history in the mountains, conquering a face of Mount Robson on skis.
This is CBC Vancouver News.
Hello, I'm Dan Burritt. Thanks for joining us. The BC government will no longer allow people to take home prescription opioids after evidence that many of those safe supply drugs are being diverted into the hands of organized criminals. As Katie DeRosa reports, critics say the move is long overdue.
A major about-face from the NDP government on drug policy. BC's health minister says people who rely on prescription opioids like hydromorphone can no longer take those drugs home. It follows evidence revealed in leaked Ministry of Health slides that many of those safe supply pills were being diverted and trafficked nationally and internationally by organized criminals.
We've heard concerns about these medications being diverted and ending up in the wrong hands. To ensure that prescribed alternatives are used safely and effectively, these medications will be taken under the supervision of a healthcare worker.
Josie Osborne also announced an investigation into 60 so-called bad actor pharmacies. They're alleged to have offered incentives to get safe supply clients, then billing the pharmacare system for those prescriptions. Critics argue the changes are long overdue by a government they say refused to acknowledge that diversion was even happening.
The real bad actors are those that ignored years of evidence that this was causing harm, downplaying it, denying it to the detriment of our province, fueling addiction, fueling the fentanyl trade, and putting money into the hands of criminals.
The issue dominated question period, putting Premier David Eby on the defensive.
Will he finally admit that the NDP's Safe Supply program has failed and it has only fueled BC's drug crisis?
We know it saved lives. We know it stabilized lives. The Conservatives know that too.
Not good enough, says the BC Conservatives' mental health and addictions critic who opened up about her own struggle.
14 years ago, I was a homeless addict living on the downtown east side. And I can tell you that the people that are going to die today and tomorrow deserve better than that answer.
Josie Osborne denies the government dragged its feet in responding to the problem of diversion.
And it's important to act on that evidence when we get it. And I am not going to be making knee-jerk reactions.
Provincial Health Officer Dr. Bonnie Henry, who introduced the Safe Supply program in 2020 during the pandemic to separate people from toxic street drugs, was not informed of the policy change. It's another sign the BC government is moving away from some of her drug policies. Katie DeRosa, CBC News, Victoria.
A looming trade war with the United States has sparked uncertainty, to say the least, in BC's housing market. Industry leaders say construction costs for new developments are already sky high, and retaliatory tariffs on American materials would drive them up even further. Our John Hernandez explains how it could all delay future housing projects.
Being in development and construction right now is not for the faint of heart. A lot of us aren't sleeping super well at night.
Carla Guerrera wants to mitigate risk right now. Her development firm is behind this affordable housing project in Vancouver, and they're already preparing for tariffs on American-made construction goods like appliances and plumbing fixtures.
We and our partners are frantically trying to look at where we can source Canadian products and divert away from some of the U.S. suppliers we were previously considering. But in doing that, it's very difficult to anticipate keeping projects on track.
A trade war between the U.S. and Canada is looming large over BC's housing and development industry. There are tens of thousands of active housing projects in the province, all at various stages of development.
People just don't know what to do. They feel paralyzed to make a decision.
These real estate marketers say the unknowns make it difficult for developers to forge ahead on large-scale projects.
There are escalating costs in a market where purchasing power is constrained, and so the viability of projects comes into question. To the extent that those conditions remain, we will see fewer projects come to market or launch than we otherwise would have.
Industry leaders say it's already hard to get big developments off the ground. The latest report from the Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation says many condominium projects are on hold because of low demand for high-priced pre-sales.
We've already got projects stalled. This is going to see even fewer projects go ahead.
And fewer projects being built now could pinch future supply.
There just will not be enough new home inventory to probably keep up with what demand will look like over that time. And that's both rental and for sale.
Uncertainties and a lot of what-ifs, which is why industry reps are calling for a swift and diplomatic resolution between the two countries. John Hernandez, CBC News, Vancouver.
The Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation, meanwhile, is forecasting Vancouver's rental market will see growing vacancies in the next few years. Ottawa's recent immigration policy changes are expected to lower demand. But as Michelle Morton explains, prices could still go up.
If some renters in BC have been thinking about moving to Vancouver, it might be easier than usual to find a place over the next year or two. The Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation's latest forecast summary for Vancouver's rental market shows an annual vacancy rate climb to 2.9% in 2027. However, that doesn't mean prices are necessarily going to drop, with the report noting the average price for a two-bedroom expected to climb to more than $2,700 in that time.
A record number of units are under construction now, especially in the purpose-built rental construction as efforts to increase rental supply. And most of these units will enter the market in the next few years.
And she says those new units could possibly enter the market with high prices. But at the same time, a lower rental demand is expected due to the federal government's new immigration levels plan.
Recent years have seen a large inflows of non-permanent residents. We expect to see this net inflow slow over the next few years. So as a result, we expect to see lower demand.
She says that could make rental prices competitive as well, which one online rental platform in Vancouver is already seeing.
We're seeing a lot of, property managers or landlords in general doing 3 months free rent, or, renters being able to negotiate a lower asking rent price. And that's something that I think renters are doing a lot more because everyone is aware that rent prices have fallen.
Meanwhile, concerns over a possible recession because of the threat of U.S. tariffs.
A very large fraction of Canada and BC's economic activity involves exports to the U.S. If that gets effectively shut down by a 25% tariff, you see people losing jobs and losing income. When people lose jobs and income, obviously they're not able to pay as much for rent and they're less able to purchase a property.
Davidoff says construction costs for new developments are already high, and the looming economic situation could make things worse.
We're going to see a slowdown in construction. That won't have any impact on affordability in the short run, but a few years from now, we'll have a shortage of units.
Complicating matters further for some condo owners, the report indicates investors who have purchased pre-construction units to rent out are increasingly selling as costs rise faster than rental incomes. Michelle Morton, CBC News, Vancouver.
Plans to redesign Vancouver's aging aquatic centre will be in front of the park board next week. As Mira Baines reports, some swimmers are very upset the new design could cut the Olympic-sized pool in half.
The new plan for the Vancouver Aquatic Centre is making a splash, and the Vancouver Park Board will have to decide on Monday whether the renewal proposal moves ahead. The controversy is over the existing 50-meter pool, which is set to be replaced by a 25-meter pool and could take up to 3 years to build.
Absolutely sheer panic.
Cutting the original pool length by half has raised the ire of a local swim club that uses the pool for training and rents out the space at the facility.
It may not be fully functional for the user groups that they're using this facility now, but this is what the architects and the consultants are interested in.
Still, the Vancouver Aquatic Centre is near the end of its functional lifespan, with one of its walls even failing a structural seismic performance test 3 years ago. The project was to cost $140 million, but now needs an additional $30 million.
We've been advocating for more money to the city and the province to be able to accommodate the 50-meter pool. The city has not provided us the funding that's needed, and as such, we have to move forward with the funds that we have.
He says the redesign prioritizes leisure pools for an aging population. There's also a petition to prevent the pool from what groups call shrinking the lap pool after years of consultation, public input, and a plebiscite.
If we want our athletes who reside in the city of Vancouver to have the best chance on an international scale, they should be training in an international sized pool.
Other swimmers are also wondering where they will go.
It's going to be a big issue for us, so because both of my kids, they come here for the classes.
Staff have recommended the project. Park Board commissioners will vote on the new plan next Monday. The City of Vancouver says it will consider the plan and potential extra funding at its next meeting. Mira Baines, CBC News, Vancouver.
A code of conduct hearing was supposed to begin this week for 3 Coquitlam RCMP officers. The trio are accused of making racist and sexist comments in a private group chat. But as Jason Proctor explains, the Mounties want the 3-member board overseeing the hearing to step aside.
The 3 members of the board overseeing this code of conduct hearing are expected to decide on Friday whether or not to recuse themselves from the proceedings in what's really been a remarkable turn of events in this proceeding, which is a code of conduct hearing into the activities of 3 Coquitlam Mounties who are accused of making atrocious and racist comments in a private messaging app called Signal. Now, these allegations came to light in 2021. They include things like making mocking remarks about a colleague's body shape, a female colleague's body shape, or mocking the subject of a sexual assault investigation. What their lawyers have claimed at the beginning of this hearing is that the board itself is either biased or has the perception of the bias because of the way that they have been talking about this case in their private communications, including communication on an RCMP server and a file folder labeled 3 Amigos. So what their lawyer says is that sort of connotes this 3 Musketeers idea, the one for all and all for one, the idea that these guys are friends and that they'd all lie for each other and that they'd all go down together if it came to that, which, you know, whether or not that's true, that could be perceived that way, and that perception of bias would have the ability to taint this proceeding in the eyes of the public. In response, the RCMP's lawyer said, here we go again, accusing, you know, the lawyers for these guys of delaying inordinately and then bringing this up at the 11th hour and, you know, basically being desperate in terms of using a term amigos, which after all means friends, which they said there's nothing wrong with that. There's even a pancake restaurant that RCMP members would meet at in Coquitlam called Amigos, which came up a couple of times with regards to this. As I say, the decision is expected to happen on Friday. If they did decide to recuse themselves, that could delay these proceedings even further because you would need a new board to oversee it, presumably, and it's already been going on since 2021 when the complaints were first made. Jason Proctor, CBC News, Vancouver.
Meteorologist Russ Lecade is here with our first peek at the weather. Russ.
Oh, okay, Dan. Yeah, well, some puddles outside the studio, although the rain appears to be tapering off a little bit. And what we saw today was some localized downpours and some gaps in between. It wasn't really raining all day, but some areas got it pretty good. We've got a split flow offshore. I think that's actually going to lead us into a little bit of a gap tomorrow where we should have some drier time during the middle of the day. So a little light rain lingering overnight, then drier, lots of leftover cloud, about 8 degrees, maybe a sprinkler or two, Dan, but nothing much more than that.
Sounds good. Thanks, Russ.
You bet.
A BC woman becomes the first to ski the south face of Mount Robson. Her harrowing story next. Parents and guardians of students at Seymour Heights Elementary School in North Vancouver received some startling news recently. A letter was sent out informing them the school has seen a number of cases of scarlet fever in the community. School officials say they're doing extra cleaning in classrooms and common areas where some infections were found. The school district says it has no concerns right now. Scarlet fever is caused by group A streptococcus bacteria. It appears as a rash along with high fever, and it's treatable with antibiotics. Infected people and those around them are urged to wash their hands and avoid sharing things. Well, the Rugby Sevens tournament is taking over Vancouver again this weekend. Canada's women's team will be competing in the World Series against Brazil and Spain on Friday and Australia on Saturday.
Just to see all the young girls in the crowd knowing that there's opportunity to play professional sport for women here in Canada is really important. So hoping to see lots of young girls at the games and learning what rugby is, and I hope they enjoy the weekend.
The team says it's hopeful for a win this round after bringing home a silver from the Paris Olympics. Canada's men's team, meanwhile, will play invitational games against Japan and Trinidad and Tobago to try to qualify for next year's World Sevens Series. Well, to a different kind of pitch now, a downhill one. A BC woman is one of 2 extreme athletes who, this past weekend, became the first to ski the south face of Mount Robson, the highest mountain in the Canadian Rockies. Karen Larson has their story.
This is the stunning view of Mount Robson from the park entrance. And this yellow line shows the route where history was made on Sunday.
So this part right there is not possible to go like on skis.
It's where Christina Lusty Lustenberger, former Canadian Olympic skier, now world-renowned alpinist, and adrenaline junkie partner Guillaume Pierrel skied from the summit to complete the first ever snow descent of Mount Robson's signature south face.
I think there's a huge part of relief. It was an extremely challenging and exposed line. It was incredibly stressful and just nice to put it behind us and to be able to celebrate.
It's like really big, 3,000 meters drop. So it's and it's like the biggest mountain in the Rockies. So the first feeling was just like, it's gonna be enormous.
Patience is a virtue when tackling something that's never been done before. Lustenberger first started thinking about conquering the south face 10 years ago.
Growing up in Canada and in the Columbia Valley, the Mount Robson has such a deep history of climbing and skiing. It is the king of the Rockies.
And there's the not so little problem of climbing to the top. The very top. That took the pair the better part of 2 days, including spending one night on a snowy ledge.
Even when you reach the summit, you're only halfway there. The ski descent took 3.5 hours. There was multiple rappels, transitioning from ski to climb. The mountain just put so much pressure on you.
In the history of extreme ski descents, only 3 men have ever successfully made it down Mount Robson, and they all did it on the less technical north face. With Pierrel, Lustenberger is now not only the first to bag the south side, she's the first woman, period, to ever ski down from the highest peak in the Canadian Rockies.
Finding space as an explorer and a steep skier, you start to look at mountains differently. And to put our names written on the place of Mount Robson, I think is something that we can be really proud of.
Karen Larson, CBC News, Vancouver.
To a different mountain vista, there is Whistler earlier in the day. Plenty of snow. Russ LeCape will have your BC-wide weather forecast. And yep, it's going to stay wet down here.
Hi, I'm Amy Bell, and this is your CBC Inbox.
Check out CBC News BC, your local streaming channel. It's a free ad-supported TV channel that's available 24/7, delivering breaking news, including weather updates, daily headlines, and sharing stories that matter to British Columbians. Stream your favorite CBC programs like The Early Edition, BC Today, and On the Coast. CBC News BC is available on Roku, LG, and Samsung smart devices.
The federal government has announced a multi-billion-dollar plan to build a very long, high-speed rail network between Toronto and Quebec City. The CBC's Vanessa Lee reports.
Today, I'm announcing the launch of ALTO, the largest infrastructure project in Canadian history.
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau says a high-speed rail network will be a game changer, cutting travel times in half.
It'll stimulate our economy, strengthen the bonds between cities and our two most populous provinces, and reduce costs for businesses.
Fully electric trains would transport passengers at speeds of 300 kilometers per hour along 1,000 kilometers of track, with stops in Quebec City, Trois-Rivières, Laval, Montreal, Ottawa, Peterborough, and Toronto.
For Toronto?
Getting from Montreal to Toronto would take just 3 hours.
I can't wait. It's well overdue. Europe has the high-speed trains, and we really need them too.
The federal government will be spending $3.9 billion on the design and development phase and has chosen a private consortium group called Cadence to run the project, which includes the main operator of high-speed trains in France.
Obviously, having chosen a partner gives us a step closer to project realization.
But after decades of shelved feasibility studies and false starts, any feelings of optimism come with caution. And there are complex challenges ahead, like deciding where the tracks will be laid.
Trying to acquire each and every parcel of land along that corridor is going to take individual environmental review of what the impacts of running a train through that land, but also individual negotiations with the landowners.
The Conservatives' shadow minister for transport calls it yet another promise with no details, with billions spent without laying a single piece of track. The design phase could take up to 5 years. Experts say construction will cost tens of billions of dollars. There is no timeline on when passengers can expect the network to be up and running. Vanessa Lee, CBC News, Montreal.
Buying Canadian is a lot of talk around grocery and retail stores. But can shoppers keep up the rebellion against Donald Trump when the price tag keeps rising? Lindsay Duncombe breaks it down.
This is what Made in Canada looks like. Custom golf clubs designed, assembled, tested in this Burnaby warehouse. Owner Joshua Haywood sources as much Canadian material as he can.
It's about as Canadian as a golf company can possibly get, given the restrictions that we have from the manufacturing side.
In the past couple of weeks, business is up, way up.
Canadian sales have just gone through the roof, to our surprise, and I have no doubt that the reason for that is just because of all the issues that we're facing with Trump and the potential for the tariffs. Where are you from? We're based in Canada.
His inbox is filling up with inquiries, trying to find a Canadian brand. I will not buy American. I'm thinking of selling my irons, almost new, and purchasing Haywood irons solely because they are Canadian made. Haywood sells to the U.S. American tariffs would hurt, so new Canadian business is important.
It's kind of a savior. If our Canadian sales continue to increase at the rate that they are, it'll most likely be able to help offset a significant portion of our U.S. sales.
In a recent online survey commissioned by fuel company Petro-Canada, 94% of people responding said it was important to support Canadian businesses. 76% said they were willing to pay more to buy Canadian, and 34% said they had substituted a product they would normally buy with the Canadian option. People who study consumer behavior say the push to buy Canadian is an unprecedented response to unprecedented threats.
I'm only going to buy Canadian.
It's kind of emotional, isn't it?
Oh my God, yes. We spend all day talking about this, unfortunately.
It makes sense to stay local, buy Canadian, and support local businesses.
I don't think I'll be visiting the States really this year, and we'll see how the next couple of years pan out.
I did see an article that laid everything out for you. You can buy this instead of Nikes or Adidas and stuff like that, so it's good to know for sure.
Business professor David Soberman says it's too early to have complete data on just how many Canadians are changing their habits, but something big is happening.
I've never seen anything like this in my life before, and I think because our existence as a country has never been sort of threatened explicitly by somebody who has a lot of power.
The reality is, no matter how much Canadians change their behavior, our spending power alone can't offset the massive losses that could come with Trump's proposed tariffs. And then there's the big question, can we keep this up?
And when we look at how consumers shop, there are factors that influence their shopping behavior.
Melise Panetta teaches consumer behavior and marketing at Wilfrid Laurier University. She says there are psychological and social reasons why people want to buy Canadian, but there's one big factor that could get in the way. A lot of us are broke.
For Canadians today, we're looking at unprecedented financial challenges with the living crisis. Canadians are struggling. And at that moment of decision making, they're going to have to weigh the importance of their behaviors in supporting Canadian products with the realities that they're dealing with in their financial situation.
So you're still happy with this? Yeah. Hard times can leave an impression, though. Just ask Julie Brown, owner of Province of Canada Clothing in Toronto.
I'm from a small town in Quebec that was actually a big manufacturing town growing up, and when I was in high school, a lot of those businesses moved to the US and overseas, and it kind of destroyed our town.
Watching those companies pack up and leave, watching family members lose their jobs, planted a seed in Brown.
Any typos in that?
She wanted to make things and employ people at home. And that's just what Province of Canada does.
Obviously, you can't grow cotton in Canada, but we do knit 50 to 75% of our fabrics right here in Canada. So the fabric, a lot of the fabric is made here, and then we cut and sew everything here.
Let's order them.
Now, all of a sudden, business is booming as people seek out alternatives to American brands.
In February, we've doubled our sales. So it's been huge. Canadians are definitely putting their money where their mouths are.
A sweatshirt here will run you $128. A toque on sale for $25. Not everyone's budget, for sure.
We understand that not everyone can shop with us. We get that. But for those who can, they've started to make the choice, to shop Canadian and be conscious of how they're spending their money.
There is so much we don't know about what's next. If tariffs hit hard, how many of us will be able to afford new clothes? Or golf clubs, for that matter. But while we can shop, it seems Canadians are using that purchasing power to drive a message south. Lindsay Duncombe, CBC News, Vancouver.
As the search for answers continues, the airline at the heart of this weekend's fiery crash in Toronto is offering flyers big bucks. We'll explain the conditions and what we know so far. That's next. It looks like some progress is being made in the investigation into the crash of Delta Airlines Flight 4819. No one was killed when the passenger jet crashed, caught fire, and flipped over while landing at Toronto's Pearson International on Monday. As Lisa Shing shows us, some survivors are now looking at legal action.
Piece by piece, crews are starting to move the Delta Airlines plane off the tarmac after 2 days of investigations. Inside the terminals, things are getting back to normal. Most travelers also on the move, though some delays and cancellations continue.
Very stressful, but we're heading out at 11 today. Fingers crossed, and get a 5-day vacation rather than 7.
Hopefully everyone's okay. And I mean, there are such things we can't control, so.
On Monday afternoon, Delta Flight 4819, arriving from Minneapolis, crashed on landing and flipped upside down. Passengers scrambling to get out as firefighters doused the flames. Come on! As of this morning, the airline says 21 of the nearly 80 people on board were sent to hospital. 20 of them have now been released.
One of them has returned because of significant head pain and likely has suffered a concussion because of the seatbelt releasing and her falling and striking her head in the plane.
One couple on that flight has retained this lawyer to make sure
that their damages are going to be compensated for as a result of this event that could have been much more tragic.
In a statement, Delta Airlines said it's providing crash survivors with hotels, meals, and transportation, and will soon get customers their baggage. Securing, identifying, sorting, and cleaning all belongings left on board could take a matter of weeks, it said. Now that it appears investigators are finishing their work on the runway, they'll now try to figure out what forces were at play when the plane descended.
You have a point where you arrest the descent, in other words, and pull back a little bit on the elevators to make sure you have a smooth descent. So you have a rate of ascent which you arrest, it's called a round out or flare, and that I don't see that.
Investigators with the Transportation Safety Board of Canada say they have the plane's black box and it's in for analysis. Now, trying to find the cause of the crash will take weeks, possibly months. Lisa Shing, CBC News, Toronto.
Now, one avenue crash investigators will explore is the weather. More now from CBC News meteorologist Johanna Wagstaff.
At this point, we don't know what led to the flipped Delta Airlines plane at Pearson Airport. Despite all the videos you're probably seeing of blowing snow, we can't even say if weather was a factor at all. There are just too many possible variables. But as a meteorologist and a private pilot, let me tell you, we are always thinking about weather and managing variables, especially during those last few minutes before landing. Here's what we know about the weather conditions at the time. We have meteorological data from Pearson Airport 12 minutes before the crash. This is a METAR, short for Meteorological Aerodrome Report, used mainly by meteorologists and pilots for current observations of the weather. It says winds were coming from the west, steady at 52 kilometers per hour, gusting to 65 kilometers per hour, with reports of blowing snow but fairly good visibility. We also know the plane was landing on runway 23. Runway numbers line up with compass degrees, so 230 is landing towards the southwest. So we always try to land into the wind. It slows the plane down faster, and in a controlled busy airport like Pearson, the tower is going to pick what runways are closest to landing straight into the wind and let all the planes know. In this case, there were a couple of active runways. The closest Delta could get to landing straight into the wind was runway 23, but that meant winds were coming at them from a 40-degree angle from their right. When coming into land with winds that are blowing from a direction that is not directly head-on, that's called a crosswind landing. And there are a couple different ways as a pilot you can account for that. You can crab or angle your nose towards the wind a little so you don't get blown off course. So the plane is lined up with the runway even if the nose isn't. You can side slip by putting one wing a little lower into the wind to keep you in line. And to keep the plane from turning, you also have to engage the tail controls, the rudder, in an opposite direction. In both cases, this means some juggling of the control surfaces while landing and ultimately straightening the plane out in those final moments before touchdown. It's something that pilots do all the time. Different aircraft have different wind and wind angle limits that manufacturers and airlines recommend landing in. That's because you don't want to put too much strain rain on the landing gear if the plane ends up touching down a little sideways. The standard crosswind procedure in this type of plane, the CRJ 900, is to crab into the crosswind and to decrab just before touchdown. What actually happened, we don't know. We do know that based on flight tracking details from flight radar, this plane's final descent rate was quite fast. A normal descent rate is about 400 feet per minute, and in this case, it was around 1,000 feet per minute, more than twice as fast. The rate of descent caught my eye because this plays into what we call the flaring. This is a maneuver that every pilot does in the last few seconds. By gently pulling the nose back, you slow down the rate of descent. The plane's main wheels touch down first, and you generally get a softer landing. But the faster the descent, the harder it is to pull this off. There's one more piece of information that we have that investigators will be looking at, and that's the state of the runway. Was it icy? Was it snowy? Remember, Toronto had just been hit by a massive snowstorm the day before. A notice was issued to all flight personnel in the area that same day, what we call a NOTAM, giving details about the state of the runway given the recent snow and gusting winds. Runway 23 was complicated. Most of the cleared portion of the runway was a combo of dry snow patches and dry compacted snow patches. But the runway was not cleared all the way to the edges. Normally, this is a 200-foot wide runway, but only a 160-foot wide path was cleared. On either side, it would have looked white. So approaching this runway would have looked narrower or farther away than it normally would be fully cleared. But again, we can't say if this was a factor. Ultimately, we can't say if any of these weather conditions were a factor in what happened. But as investigators from the Canadian Transport Safety Board work to find answers, we know weather will be one of their questions. We know even though pilots are trained to deal with all kinds of scenarios, this kind of weather can add a layer of complexity to any flight. I'll be watching this investigation closely to see what we can all learn from it.
From one weather expert to another, meteorologist Russ Lecate here with our BC-wide forecast, and we're back to wet coast. That old
wet on
song.
the coast, yeah. We'll add a new wrinkle, Dan. Wet on the coast, and how about wet across the interior as well? Here we are in the middle of winter. It's been a while since we've seen this, but again, it's this double-barreled jet stream off the Pacific here, and it's sort of bringing milder conditions to the coastline, lots of moisture as well, and it's a series of these little ripples, these waves along the jet stream, all impacting the coastline. Of course, we get a nice split flow across the coast here right now. Might help to slow down that next incoming system and give us a little bit of a break around the lower mainland for tomorrow. I'll show you what I mean there when we look at a forecast model. That's the here and now with this low just moving through. We roll that ahead to sometime around midday tomorrow, and the next system is on the doorstep. But generally speaking, lots of clouds around Metro Vancouver. I don't know that we see a lot of rain from that system just yet. But if we roll it ahead to sort of later in the day, or rather early in the day on Friday, at the end of this week, that's a well-developed system right on the doorstep, and it looks like it's going to be wet again for a few days in a row at least. Tomorrow's forecast, province-wide, it was very windy in Victoria today, gusts topping 60K. We had gusts topping 80K at Campbell River. Winds have now diminished. You'll get some rain along the west coast tomorrow, some scattered showers into Victoria. Whistler's a wet day. It might start out at +1 with a little sort of sleet mixed in, but generally it's rain. Look across the interior. All of these temperatures climbing onto the high side of the freezing mark. We haven't seen that in weeks. Looking at rain showers and sunny breaks in Kamloops, 6 degrees. A similar recipe, a high of 4 for Williams Lake. The one that really stands out to me is Fort St. John. So many weeks in a row, -20, -30 for a high, climbing to 0, and the day after that, it'll be 7 degrees above 0. So a lot of that milder Pacific air is succeeding in pushing its way inland. And it was a mild one around here today as well. We had some localized downpours, some gaps in between the rain. We managed to hit double digits in a few spots, and we'll see those in parts of our longer range forecast as well. I don't think tomorrow's quite as mild, but it's not quite as wet, so there's a trade-off there. Lots of cloud, a sprinkle or two. Rain is back during the day Friday. It's not raining all day Saturday, all day Sunday, but some pockets of heavy rain are in there, so plan accordingly. And it looks wet until early next week, Dan. I think we get a break in the action Wednesday, Thursday, Friday for next week.
Something to look forward to. Russ, thanks very much. There is deep concern in Europe after some shocking new remarks from Donald Trump. The U.S. president saying it was Volodymyr Zelensky who started the war with Russia not 3 years ago, and not Vladimir Putin who ordered the invasion. Anna Cunningham has more.
President Donald Trump has labelled Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky a dictator. Writing on his platform Truth Social, the US president said Zelensky was a dictator without elections and that he better move fast or he's not going to have a country left. Now, President Trump also takes swipe in this post at Europe, saying it failed to bring peace. I think there's little doubt that this will not go down well in Paris, where EU and Western leaders, including Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, are joining in a meeting. He's joining that meeting remotely, and they're discussing Ukraine's future and security in Europe. This morning, President Volodymyr Zelensky said that Donald Trump was living in a disinformation bubble after comments the US president made last night suggesting it was Ukraine who started the war, a line that has been used by the Kremlin. Take a listen.
Ну, тобто, на жаль, президент Трамп з великою повагою до нього відносимося як до лідера народу, який ми дуже поважаємо, американський народ, який нас постійно підтримує. На жаль, живе в цьому дезінформаційному просторі.
President Putin has also been in front of the cameras in St. Petersburg today. He praised the outcome of Tuesday's Russia-US talks in Riyadh and said nobody is excluding Ukraine. This is what he said.
Да, мне доложили первое, второе, я оцениваю их высоко. Результат есть. На мой взгляд, сделали первый шаг для того, чтобы возобновить работу по самым разным направлениям, которые представляют взаимный интерес.
Many knew that under President Trump things would be different, but I think those countries, including Canada, will certainly be surprised at just how fast this relationship between the US and Ukraine has deteriorated in just a matter of days. Anna Cunningham, CBC News, London.
Health officials in Western India are struggling to contain an outbreak of a potentially deadly autoimmune disorder. It's happening in the city of Pune, a major IT and manufacturing hub. Authorities have intensified surveillance and testing and even launched an awareness campaign. But as the CBC's Salima Shivji reports, the number of cases still rises.
An everyday task now much more difficult. Avanti Naik has to have her mother with her constantly, guiding her in the kitchen. She's still suffering from creeping paralysis. That's also hit more than 200 others in her neighborhood. She has Guillain-Barré syndrome, or GBS, a rare disorder where a body's immune system attacks its nerves.
There was a swelling here.
It started with seeing double and got much worse.
This jaw became heavy and I was not able to speak. So that time I was very much worried. And then we ran to the hospital.
She spent 2 weeks in intensive care, unable to speak or swallow. Avanti was one of the first patients in Pune in India's western Maharashtra state that's seen a worrying outbreak of GBS, which isn't contagious but has no cure. 9 people have died. Authorities quickly set up dedicated hospital beds, and with the patients all from a specific area of Pune, they started to trace the source, a pathogen known to cause GBS that officials believe came from contaminated water in a well that supplies tens of thousands of people.
The outbreak points to a larger problem, not just in Pune, one of the fastest growing cities in a rapidly developing India, when proper facilities like water purification plants aren't catching up to the pace of urbanization.
For this doctor who treated several of the patients, it's painful to think the outbreak could have been avoided.
This is a public health failure. We need to wake up.
He says while the mortality rate from GBS is quite low, treatment is very expensive, and the long-term effects are hard to predict.
But the morbidity, that means wheelchair-bound people, or people still having residual weakness, or still having symptoms like tingling numbness of both limbs, is still substantial. That is the real cost of this war which we have fought in the last 1 month.
A war that's not yet over. Confirmed cases are still rising, but more slowly than at the outbreak's peak. Salima Shivji, CBC News, Pune.
Dozens of North Shore first responders are taking the polar plunge to try to raise money for a good cause and more accessibility. More on their cold dip after this. First responders on the North Shore took part in the polar plunge this morning to raise money for Special Olympics BC. As Jessica Chung explains, the money will help athletes with intellectual disabilities access its programs.
A morning polar plunge for a good cause. Members of the North Vancouver RCMP, West Vancouver Police, North Shore Rescue, and Vancouver Law Courts made a splash at Ambleside Park. And it's all to raise money for Special Olympics BC, and a number of Special Olympic athletes also showed up to take the plunge.
Well, it keeps me fit, and also lots of fans. It's a lot of fun doing it, and also it makes me happy.
So what do you think Special Olympics means to you?
Heart and soul. But me life,
yeah,
and friends, and amazing coaches.
It goes to show like no matter who you are or what kind of challenge you have, it means that you're still special to everyone. No matter if you have, I don't know, ADHD or autism, who cares? People still respect you for who you are.
1, 2, 3, Special Olympics!
Special Olympics BC is a non-profit that offers sports programs and competitions for those with intellectual disabilities. The organization says their programs are the primary place, if not the only place, where their athletes can experience healthy physical activity, social connections, and opportunities to be seen for their abilities. This is the third year that North Vancouver RCMP has held the annual Polar Plunge fundraiser in conjunction with the West Vancouver Police Department.
We want to support organizations that help people that, are not quite, don't get the support all the time, and Special Olympics BC does that for people with intellectual disabilities.
The fundraising efforts have already exceeded the event's $4,500 goal, and the money raised is going to help fund the year-round programs run by Special Olympics BC. Jessica Chung, CBC News, West Vancouver.
And thank you for being with us tonight on CBC Vancouver News at 6. You can watch this newscast on CBC Gem, our free app, as well as on YouTube, and of course our website, cbc.ca/BC. We will have your next local news at 11 o'clock, right after the National. We'll see you then. Good night.